Hi, welcome to my channel. This is my daughter Ayana's C-section birth story. But before we get into it, just a teeny little bit of background so you have some context about who I am. My name is Shona Virtue. I'm a yoga teacher, ex-gymnast, PT, and soon to be qualified psychologist. Hit that subscribe button. I bring you evidence-based tips that you can apply to your life today across 3 pillars of health: psychology, physiology, so our bodies, and relationships. Most of all, I'm here to help you make a positive change to your life. So let's get on with the video. On the 1st of December, I gave birth. It feels funny saying that because I had a C-section. If any of you watching have had a C-section or given birth, you'll know that, especially if you've done both, that it sort of is a weird feeling, right? It's like giving birth, I imagine, would feel like this very physical process. Now, I'm not taking away from the C-section experience. I obviously had it myself, but it feels strange to associate this idea of giving birth when I was completely numb from my nipples down. But of course, I'm still giving birth. So on the 1st of December, I had a baby, this little baby Ayana. She was breech. She was small, so we weren't really sure if I was going to be able to hold her, because if they're under 2.4 kilos here in Australia, they tend to take them away to the NICU or the nursery straight away before they give you, which I really didn't want, because I really did want to have that first skin to skin contact, immediately. And I also wanted to get as quickly into the breastfeed as possible. She also was classified as being growth restricted. So not only was she small, but throughout my pregnancy, we had a couple of times where we were a little bit concerned about whether she was even growing. And my partner and I had this little ongoing joke, because as you do when serious things happen, like the way that you try to cope with these things is making light of the situation. And we had this sort of running joke that she was like trying to get me to come home from England to Australia by like squeezing the umbilical cord and being like, I want to go. I want to go to Australia. Obviously that was not happening, but it helped to make light of a situation that was quite scary for some time. Her abdominal circumference didn't budge for a few weeks, and that meant that doctors in the UK didn't want to let me fly home, and doctors in Australia were still very concerned about her health and whether she would even make it to 39 weeks, which is when I did the planned C-section. And just to throw another spanner in the works, at 28 weeks, which is when I ended up flying home, or was it 27? When did we fly home? I had to fly home earlier. Yeah, so I think I ended up flying home at 27. I was trying to push it as much as possible, but I think around the 25, 26 mark, I went in to see my gynecologist and OBGYN in the UK. And I was really just going in to get the approval signed so that I could get on the plane. She looked at my bloods and she was like, okay, cool. Yep. All your bloods are great. Sugar's fine. Great glucose. Everything looking good. She's like, let's just pop you on the ultrasound machine. We'll just have a quick look. Okay, cool. And she started doing the measurements and she said, let's put you through a growth scan. Didn't say anything to me, but she said, I just want the other sonographer to have a look at your baby's growth. Turns out baby wasn't growing, as I said already. And this was what prompted us to have to fly home early. But she wasn't going to let me fly based on these numbers. So she actually was like, I can't let you fly. You might have to be here. I wasn't about that life. I knew I wanted to come home and be able to have the baby here in Australia. So I said, tell me what I need to do. I will book a flight today if I have to get home as quick as possible. And she said, well, ideally, if you were staying here, I would see you in a week max. So if you can promise me that you're going to fly tomorrow or like in the next few days and then book straight into the hospital, I'll let you go. Like you can go. So my partner and I scrambled to get our shit together basically so that we could fly. We had a house in the UK. We didn't have anything packed up. Like we were ready to like fly in a couple of weeks. We basically, in this huge whirlwind, try to pack up our flat, try to get everything sorted so that we can get home ASAP so that I can get to the doctors in Australia. I mentioned a spanner in the works. This was my brush with pneumonia. So the weekend before flying, obviously we're trying to organize everything. I think we go into the city or central London to pick up some things so that we can fly home. I think we had to buy an extra luggage bag. And we come back home and I just start to feel really run down, really tired, start to develop a bit of a cough, a bit of a head cold. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. Okay. Take a little bit of medication, go to bed, wake up, had a bit of a head cold, but was like, okay, I'm flying home. Like this is happening. Did COVID tests, everything was coming up clear. Get on the plane. For those of you that don't know, everyone knows. But England is very far away from Australia, so that flight is quite the long haul. My symptoms aren't getting any better. It then develops into pneumonia, which means that flight for me is me really clinging to life. And I say that without an ounce of exaggeration. I remember being in my seat, trying to sort of like huddle over with this huge belly, by the way, rounding my spine so that I can maximize on my lung capacity and my rib cage positioning. By the way, for those of you that have watched any of my other videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. But being in this rounded position creates more space for the back of my body so I could take breaths. But the problem was that the alveoli in my lungs were 100% filling with water, or like fluid mucus. So as I took a breath in, I'd get this wheeze. As I took a breath out, I'd be wheezing. And I truly spent both of those flights focusing on every inhale and every exhale. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever had an experience like that. I'm sure you guys have, where you have had to live hours or periods of your life where you're focusing breath by breath by breath just to get through each individual moment. Would not recommend. Would not recommend not pregnant, but definitely would not recommend while pregnant. Aside from that, I had actually a fairly normal pregnancy. I worked out, I lifted weights, I walked everywhere. I had sex, although towards the end of the pregnancy, I did not want to have sex because I was a little bit concerned about bringing on labor, and because we'd sort of agreed that there was going to be a planned C-section, I really didn't want to have an unplanned C-section or go into labor, have, Ayana move down into the pelvis or into that birth canal. I've watched many, many YouTube videos. I've spoken to many different obstetricians, registrars. Even Justin's sister actually is one of the best OBGYNs in Australia, I would say. And she'll get mad at me for saying that, but she'll be like, the pressure. But she is amazing. And she was talking me through some of the things that can happen. So I really didn't want to have to go through that. So we were both really careful towards the end. Going into the C-section, I was extremely nervous. Part of this is because I'd never had surgery before. I have a very strong attachment to my body, and that's probably something that I would love to go into detail more on philosophical or psychological way, but I'm not going to unpack that in this video. But just know that I was really, truly, truly nervous. I'd never had a general anesthetic before, so I'd never been put out. The closest thing that I'd had to any sort of invasive treatment was having a tooth pulled, which is pretty intense. And when they did that, they did the local, it didn't work. And so they were pulling my tooth and I could feel it, and they didn't believe me. I mean, they were really like pulling at my tooth, and the whole time I was like, I can definitely feel this. And they're like, you'll be able to feel pressure. I'm like, no, I know the difference between pressure and pain. And let me tell you, I'm in agony right now. And I just had to let them get on with it, even though it didn't work. So I was extremely nervous about going into this process. I researched everything. I read scientific journals, journal articles. I went onto YouTube and I tried to watch doctors' procedures. I did everything I could. And this was my coping strategy. I wouldn't recommend it, however, because what I failed to prepare on was the fact that it doesn't matter how much you know about something. Sometimes you can know too much, but it doesn't matter how much prepared cerebral kind of knowledge you have on the concept or the process. At the end of the day, the most important thing is how well you surrender to it. And the reason I say that is because you need to be able to keep yourself calm. If you can't maintain some level of calmness, if you can't maintain a psychology that, yes, is surrendered, I mean, I keep using the word calm, but yes, essentially it's like, let's put up big letters, C-A-L-M, keep calm. Then your pain sensation will go through the roof. We know that a calm and relaxed body is going to handle something like this better than a tense one. And that goes for the whole procedure, but definitely the initial period where you're having to get those needles put in and having the anesthetic and just everything, hormones, those neurochems floating around your system. You want to be in a positive, relaxed mindset rather than a tense one. And so I think that I went into this process knowing too much. So in the 24 hours before, I quickly had to scramble to practice yogic breathing techniques, to practice engaging with my partner and staying present with focusing on him and focusing on the breath, as opposed to focusing on every little tiny bit of knowledge that I had about the C-section process and procedure, which like I said, unhelpful, because then you also are aware of every risk, every potential negative outcome. And that starts flooding to the prefrontal cortex. Instead of deep breath in, full breath out, control the things you can, which is truly just relaxation and the breath and focusing in on my partner and this beautiful birth that's about to happen. So I arrived at 7:15 a.m. They only do 3, at least at this hospital that I was at, the Royal Women's Randwick Hospital, they do 3 planned C-sections a day. And that was amazing news for me because, I don't know, in my head I was like, I don't want them to be exhausted and maybe at the end of the line and they're like, all right, chomp chomp. Even though that's totally not what doctors are like, but in my head I was like, I don't want to be at the end of the line. Turns out I was second on the day and second of 3, so it didn't matter anyway. First things first, you're met by the midwife, who is going to, kind of like a surgical midwife in a way, where she's going to take you through the entire surgical procedure. So you meet her, you sit down, she talks you through a few things, she does your vitals, she checks, blood pressure, various different body things. She also asks you to get changed, so you get naked basically, and put your little white thing on. And also your partner, or whoever you've chosen to bring with you, will also get naked. You got naked then, right? That was when you got changed, after the midwife. Huh? Oh, interesting. I thought you had to get naked under those scrubs. This whole time I was like, ooh, a nudie scrub man. No? Oh, well, that's disappointing. Okay, well, apparently your partner keeps their clothes on boring and they just wear scrubs and they just wear scrubs on the outside, but it was pretty hot. Did I take a photo of you wearing scrubs? I hope so. So this midwife will also answer any questions that you have about the procedure. Again, being the cerebral person that I am, of course I had like a gazillion questions and my partner had to be like, let's chill on the questions, huh? Let's just work on our breathing. They then, once you're prepped physically, you then move on to a surgery bed. The anesthetist comes in to greet you and talk to you and brief you and discuss the side effects. Now, what I didn't mention is that probably a week prior, you actually also have a call from another anesthetist who kind of runs you through some things. And they do this to sort of prepare you again mentally. And then obviously on the day, they then go through it again. So there's a lot of repetition, but it's obviously beneficial for this process. They talk you through the side effects of a spinal block, which is what I ended up having. And one of the really bad ones is paralysis, permanent paralysis. It's very rare. I think it's 1 in 100,000 or 1 in a million. I'm going to fact check that and we'll put it on the screen because I want to make sure I get the right statistic there for you. But it's a very low probability. But you're always thinking in your mind, like, what if I'm just that one? What if I am that one? Because you don't know. And that's how my mind thinks about it. When they say like 1 in a million, I don't think about the million, I think about the 1. My only recommendation for that, if you're anything like me, is to just bring yourself back to the breath. Keep remembering that the only moment that you can control is the one that you're experiencing right now. And even then, you can't control the variables external to yourself. You can only control how you respond to them. It is best in every situation to respond to things calmly and rationally. And so I say this retrospectively, it is very different in the moment. But thankfully I have an amazing partner who was very much like knew what his role was there, which was to keep bringing me back to the breath, keep bringing me back to the present. And he did an incredible job of that. Now, my anesthetist was amazing, and I had a really good conversation with her just about the anatomy, the whole process. I will say that if you are cerebral like me and you do like to prepare yourself with anatomical knowledge so that you can ask questions that give you satisfying answers. So for example, I wanted to know exactly where the needle was going into my spine, and I wanted them to touch it on my back. I wanted to know which vertebra it was going into. So she was like L4, L5. So I knew it was going to be low in my back, not high in my back. I get a little bit sensitive up high, and so I just knew that about myself. Now, that helped me to ask questions that were relevant to my body. So the more that you can kind of understand that stuff, you don't have to be a pro, you don't have to be qualified, you don't have to have some like anatomical course, weekend course behind you, but at least a few questions that will help guide you in a beneficial way. She explained to me those things. She put in the cannula drip for liquids, for different medications. One of the things that can happen is your blood pressure can drop very, very quickly, and that leads to often nausea. And that nausea is something that isn't ideal, obviously, when they're operating on your abdominal area. It happens. People do apparently throw up in the process. I didn't, thankfully. When you are there, your anaesthetist is very, very present with you. Will be like, talk to me about how you're feeling, and so I can create the medication, or I can give you the medication that you need to compensate for that. So if you are feeling nausea, I will probably give you something for blood pressure to bring it back to a normal state so that you don't feel that. Next steps, I get wheeled into the room. Okay, I've got a pillow, so we're gonna do a little demo. This is the part that I was dreading the most, but they ask you to hug a pillow and use the pillow. You put your legs up on these sort of like, I actually had like one leg on a stool, the other leg was on Justin, and I folded forward. I knew that there are 2 injections, so you've got your small needle, which is just the local anesthetic to help numb the area so that they can get that bigger needle, which is where the true anesthetic, the spinal block, goes, and that's a much bigger needle. It has to penetrate all the way through to the spinal cord, or like it's not actually going into the cord, but it's going slightly below those nerves to try to create obviously a numbing effect in that area and below and above. So you round forward. I had my hand on Justin's shoulder. I locked my eyes into Justin. For some of you, you're probably like, what the hell? This seems like overly serious way to think about this thing. But I'm telling you now, I really had I was like dripping with sweat. I was so anxious about this particular part because I don't like not being able to see something. Normally, if I have a blood test or any injection, I'll always watch it go in. I'll feel the piercing of the skin and I'll feel the pain associated, and it just puts my mind at ease. When I can't see something and it's happening behind, it feels so out of my control, even though that is as well, but for some reason I really can't handle it. So I really struggled. Knew it was going into L4, L5. I asked the anaesthetist to put her hand on the area she was putting the needle first, so that I had a connection to that area from a sensation perspective. And then I asked her to verbalize everything she was doing. And she was amazing. She really said everything. She was like, okay, so now what I'm going to do is place the small needle into your back. And I was like, okay. She was like, I just want you to take a deep breath in and relax, keep focusing on the breath. I had my eyes locked in at Justin. He was trying to get me to focus. He could see every time I went into anxiety, I would look away. And he's like, come back, look at me, let's take that deep breath in, because when you're going back into that mental cerebral state, the chances are you're going to go into thinking. And so I didn't want to look at him. I wanted to go back into counting all the risks, remembering all the things. And he had to really work to pull my attention to be like, okay, and I want you to focus on each inhalation. So I did. Now, most people describe it as a bee sting. I've never been stung by a bee before, so I really had no idea what that meant. So I'm just going to tell you, it definitely stings a little bit when that small needle goes in, but it's so manageable. And I say that as someone who, it's not that I think I have a fairly high pain threshold, but I have like pre-anxiety about pain. Then when the pain happens, I'm not like, oh, I'm just like, oh, okay. But it's anticipatory low pain threshold, if that makes sense. So it was really like a sting, lasted for about 3 seconds. It didn't even have the edginess that a local has in other places. Like sometimes when you get a local, I've had one up higher, I've had them in different places on my body, and they have always been like, and I've had one in my, as I said, in my tooth. That one didn't work. The other one that I had was to cut a mole out actually, and that one I remember feeling the local and then this extra sting, and I was like, ah, it made me grip my teeth, and then it was gone. This didn't happen. So after the local, they then started with the bigger needle, and I'm going to tell you very honestly that the way it was described to me was like, you'll just feel a pressure, and I don't know, I felt a bit more than a pressure. And I think that is because I was a little bit resistant to whatever anesthetic they were using. I still felt sort of like some pain, but again, manageable pain. So as long as I stayed connected to Justin's eyes, Justin's face, really focused on what I was doing with my body, things worked out for me. And I managed to stay calm. I didn't flinch. I didn't like get tense or anything like that. Something that both anaesthetists told me, and I think this is really important to acknowledge, and again, just ties into everything I'm saying about remaining calm, is that if you've ever been told to like squeeze someone's hand when you feel pain, that's the opposite of what you want to do. And the reason for that is that just creates tension. Tension makes it harder for the needle to go in. You end up feeling more sensation, more pain, if you will. So what you want to try to do at each moment is just continue to focus on the expansiveness of the inhalation and the relaxation effect of the exhalation. And I really can't say that enough. So after this happens, they then lie you back down. Supposedly, your anesthetic is supposed to take effect. Mine did not. And the reason we knew this is because they use an ice cube to test temperature along your body to see basically the pain receptors and the temperature receptors apparently are the same, or they share the same pathways. And so they use that to test. They don't like jab you with a needle to see if you're gonna feel it or not. They just test using ice. And I could feel the ice. I could feel it on my legs, I could feel it on my stomach, I could feel it everywhere in my body. And they then said, okay, that's weird, that shouldn't happen. Let's test with your feet. So can you move your toes? And I could not just move my toes, I could lift my entire legs off the surgery table. And they were like, okay, we're gonna do this again. Sat me back up, and lo and behold, I had to do that whole thing again. And I was very upset. I was like, of course, like Murphy's Law, that I am 100% doing this again. So there I was, locked into Justin's eyes, going through the same process, and they lay me back down. They tip you up and down a little bit to try and get the anesthetic to move to different areas of the body so that it spreads through evenly, so they get an even numbing of your body. And so they did that the first time, and it didn't work. And so the second time they did it again, I had a double dose. Then I was numb, couldn't move my legs. I was very scared because I was like, I don't think I can move my legs, but there was like some movement in my toes, and they were like, oh, well, just that's good enough. I'm like, are you sure? It was good enough. And the process began. Now, what I'm going to say is that you do feel it. And when I say feel it, I mean, you feel without pain, and that is a very surreal experience, but it's not to be taken lightly, because I think when I first watched some of these sorts of videos on C-sections, I was under the impression that that would be normal or calming or fine, I would just accept it, but my brain didn't like that very much. And so I found myself being really uncomfortable knowing that I could feel what they were doing, couldn't see, couldn't experience pain, but still knew that they were doing things that were painful, that would be painful to my body had I not had this medication. So it just messed with me a little bit. In order to combat that, I had to again lock into Justin. So Justin's up near my head, curtains up, I can't see anything, but I'm feeling everything. I'm looking at Justin and I'm just staying connected. He's taking me through some box breathing. He's taking me through some relaxation practice. We then start moving into conversation because I was like, I just want to talk to you to distract me from this experience. Because funnily enough, going into relaxation breaths was actually just bringing me further into feeling. So that's something I would definitely note. A little side note there is just be aware, like sometimes relaxation practices aren't effective, particularly if you have a fear of what is happening and it's actually happening to you. For people who experience panic disorders, relaxation practices are actually a contraindication because that sense of relaxation can sometimes make you more aware of sensation and senses. So it's not always the best thing. Now, it was for the needle because I needed my body to be relaxed, but in this case, I had no choice. My body was being forced into relaxation, and so it was just about trying to cope with my mind to be able to manage that moment. And so I said to Justin, let's stop the breathing. Can we just talk? Can we talk? And we talked about jiu-jitsu. We talked about wrestling. We talked about like the most random things. I think at one point I was even like, talking, we are talking. He was like, what? And I'm on some drugs. So I think I'm on morphine or something like that. So I'm a little bit out of it anyway. Honestly, what feels like 2 minutes pass, and they then say like, baby's here. They pull the curtain down and there she is. And I can tell you now that that is the most surreal moment for me, other than feeling people like cut into your body, is that there she is. And she was screaming. And I was so happy that she was crying because I was so worried, given that she was small, she was breech. I was just prepared for them to like take her away, and they didn't. And she was there, and she was there with me, and she actually stopped crying. There's a clip I'll share with you guys. She stopped crying when she heard my voice.
Hey, that's okay, baby. We're right here. That's all right. My mama's still here. You can't lie on my face, baby.
And that was, again, another level of surrealness, because they feel sort of somewhat unreal when they're in your tummy. You're like, I know you're in there, but it's not until they come out and you look at them and you're like, oh my God, you're really here. And you were really living inside my body, and you really know me. They know you. And somehow she just stopped crying as soon as she heard my voice and my partner's voice. And They put her on top of me. I got to breastfeed. I got to do skin to skin. I got to do everything that I wanted to do, which I'm very, very happy about, just because of everything I've read about the beneficial aspect of that. Of course, if she was underweight or if there was anything dangerous with her health, I would have accepted her being taken away, because the priority is always your baby's health. But it was definitely something that I was like visualizing. I was like, please, I just really would love to be able to have her straight after. Anyway, so after she comes out, they place her on top of you, and then it feels like ages. Honestly, it feels like quite some time, like 20 to 30 minutes. They're then sewing you up, and that does feel like a long time. She gets taken away just for a vitamin K shot. We didn't do Hep B in the hospital. We decided to do it at 6 weeks, so we'll be doing that later. That was only very momentary. She then came back and stayed on top of me the whole time while they were sewing me back up. Once they're done with that, you then get shipped off and you go into post-op, and post-op is just a process of like checking that everything's okay, that nothing happens to you last minute where you have to get rushed back into surgery. Everyone there was incredible and wonderful and nice and so friendly, and honestly the entire process like was just, I feel very, very lucky to have had the experience that I had. I know that that's not for everyone. I know that not everyone gets that lucky. I do feel like it was luck in this case. I wish I could speak to every single one of those health workers in some way, because they were incredible at every moment of the way. And I know that's not everyone's story. And I think I really want to reiterate this point, because so much online is people saying like, you know, advocate for yourself and make sure you, and I think that that's really important. I think it's also important not to assume that these people don't want the best for you. At least that was the case for me. Maybe that's not the case in every hospital or with everyone who's experiencing a C-section, but I definitely feel like I got very lucky in that everyone had the most incredible intentions and really felt like they were there to help. Honestly, the rest is history. I then get wheeled into my own room, but I have little Ayana the whole time. I'm just getting used to breastfeeding. I'm just getting used to this moment. I'm sort of really dealing with the fact that the meds are coming down and things are changing. I'm now taking different medication for the fact that I have obviously an incision. They're just checking that I'm okay. I get moved into the room that I'm going to stay in for the next 4 days. If you guys want a video on like that post-operation recovery, I can definitely do that, or I can talk more on that. I didn't want it for this video. I wanted to just purely talk about the C-section. I think a couple of things that are worth noting is that for recovery, they really encourage that you get up and start walking as soon as possible. So that obviously doesn't happen on the day that you have the operation, but I think it was either day 2 or day 3 that they were like, okay, we're gonna get you up and moving so that you can shower, but also because ambulation is the most important thing. It's when you're stagnant and the body can't do what it needs to do to clear, to lymphatically drain, clear out toxins, to get nutrients to different parts. It requires movement. This is another reason why I'm always hopping on about exercise, because it's not just about fat loss. It's not just about like how you want your body to look. It's actually completely imperative. Your entire lymphatic system is reliant upon movement in order to be pushed up against gravity. If it doesn't have movement, it doesn't function properly, and then you get sick. And so that's why people in hospital who have had like major operations where they can't move, they have nurses moving their body for them, because otherwise things go downhill quickly. So as best as possible, you want to try to move. And so that's definitely something that I would emphasize. Like, as scary as it is, when you come out, you're just like, oh, and you feel a little bit like a sack of organs, because suddenly you're able to feel your stomach in a slightly more normal place. It's very strange, but it's still important to be able to walk. Last but not least, I suffered from a chlorhexidine allergy. Chlorhex is the disinfectant they use on your skin. They also, in some hospitals, may use betadine. Some people have an allergic reaction to betadine, so they switch to Chlorhex. However, some people have an allergic reaction to Chlorhex, and I definitely don't have a reaction to betadine, so I almost wish I was like, please put betadine on me instead. I didn't know I had an allergy. About 24 to 48 hours later, I ended up in a very severe, or ended up with a very severe rash on the parts that they had put and washed me in Chlorhex. And that was more painful than the C-section recovery. So if you get a chance to speak to your doctor, if you're having a planned C-section, I would definitely ask them if you can have a patch test. They sometimes give it to you in tubes. You can do a pre-wash and just check, like, how does your body respond to it? Because on the severe end of the scale, you can go into anaphylaxis. On the milder end of the spectrum, you end up with a rash, but that rash was not friendly and it was very uncomfortable. And then if you're trying to breastfeed or learn to breastfeed, trying to bond with your baby skin to skin, it's not fun, and that takes away from it. So I was lucky that it was on my stomach. I could get skin to skin without hating it too much, but it was pretty painful. And it's summer, I was sweaty, like the whole thing was not great, and it took 10 days to go away. So I would definitely try and get that one sorted, because I hadn't seen anyone in any C-section video talk about this. I don't even know if anyone I'd ever watched had an allergic reaction, but when I put it up on Instagram recently, I had tons and tons of DMs, people saying like, oh my God, this happened to me. I had people send me photos of their rash, of their like really severe allergy or allergic reaction. And so it definitely happens. It just doesn't really get talked about beforehand. I will do a separate video on C-section recovery, especially from a health, fitness, anatomical, psychological perspective, and I'll go deep into what happens, what you need to do to be able to get up and moving. I'm now on day 13. I'm exercising already. Now that's not necessarily a recommendation, but I am moving about, and that exercise is in the form of walking only. I'm not doing any weight training, and that's because I know that even if I was to do an upper body session, that there would be a lot of core contraction going on to try and stabilize, and I know that I'm not ready for that just at this point. Walking, however, is a little bit different. Yes, there's still core stabilization required, but the risk versus reward for walking is much greater than me just trying to do an arm workout. So I'm willing to get back to weights. I will just get back to weights after that 6-week mark. I'll save all of that for a video. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I would love to hear about your experience. Like, let me know below. Did you have a Chlorhex allergy? Did you go through any stress that you wish you knew about prior? Because I feel like in the comment section, we can make it this community. I read so many comments under videos like this that were really helpful for me. So if there's anything that you personally want to share about your story or any fears you have, like share them in the comments and we can all kind of help each other to alleviate that fear, to move head on into this experience in a positive but also rational state. Sending you so much love, mama, if you have a baby on the way. Sending you love even if you don't have a baby on the way. I'll see you guys soon with a video shortly.
Hey, that's okay, baby. We're right here. That's